This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
As followers of Jesus, in whom all things were made, we acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the country on where this podcast is recorded. We recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters and thank them for protecting this land and its ecosystems since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening today.
It was most acute about 10 hours after. I couldn't touch my leg, I couldn't move it, I couldn't let the doctors touch my leg, just to have a leg hurt. If I had a knife, I genuinely would have cut my leg off. It was just agony.
I'm Georgia and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that reminds you of the good in the world. Each episode tells the story of someone who has found real hope in challenging times and made the world a better place. Episode 48, Sharon Stoliar. Sharon Stoliar is a nurse, midwife, mother and PhD candidate. In 2011, she gave birth to her beautiful baby boy. However, what was supposed to be a beautiful journey resulted in lifelong pain. In the hours after her birth, Sharon developed a piercing pain in her leg, which took 10 excruciating days to be diagnosed as acute compartment syndrome. By then, the damage had been done. 12 years later, Sharon lives with constant pain, but she's used her journey to help others. And other women have been saved from Sharon's fate because of her courage. Let's meet her. Sharon Stoliar, it's a pleasure to have you on the Finding Hope podcast today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Georgia. It's lovely to be here with you and talk to you.
Let's get straight into it, Sharon. How was your experience with the birth of your son?
Well, my overall experience, I would say, was a very traumatic experience. My labour and birth was fine. I had an emergency cesarean, but postnatally, about 10 hours after I had my son, I developed a very rare complication in my leg called acute compartment syndrome. It was an extremely excruciatingly painful condition which needs urgent surgery to save the limb and prevent permanent damage. And unfortunately, that didn't happen for me because doctors didn't know what was going on. And it was only after 10 days of being in hospital that they figured out what it was. And by that time, it was too late to do anything to prevent permanent damage. So it was a really traumatic time. I was in hospital for a full 15 days. In the postnatal ward. I couldn't get up, I couldn't move, I was in agony. I just, was bedbound, couldn't do anything for my baby. So it was a really horrible time in the first couple of weeks in hospital.
In layperson's language, because I don't have much medical knowledge, what is acute compartment syndrome? What does it involve? How is it caused?
So usually it's caused by a trauma, like a fractured bone or a crush injury. That's a traumatic injury, but there's the non-traumatic type as well, which is basically something to do with reperfusion injury, which I can't really explain, but I've read a lot about it. And it was just unfortunate, a whole heap of risk factors that are recognised outside the obstetric world kind of put together in this one scenario with me, and it was this perfect cocktail of risk factors for me, I suppose, which unfortunately it developed in my leg. So, yeah, it was just very rare. No one in the hospital had seen it in a woman who had a baby. So everyone was confused. No one knew what to do with this, patient complaining about pain in her leg who couldn't do anything. Yeah, it was quite a difficult time.
And you as a midwife, you
you had heard, obviously, of acute compartment syndrome. You suspected it in yourself, and a neurologist actually suggested it on like day 1 or 2, right? And then it was like a further 8 days until they ended up diagnosing. Tell me about the physical pain, the emotional trauma as well.
If I had to describe the pain, the physical pain, it was just, I think I would use exquisite, agonizing pain. Even morphine didn't touch it, didn't come close to touching the pain. Whereas I'd had some pethidine in labor and it worked for my labor pain, but it did nothing for this pain in my leg. My leg was visibly swollen. And the neurologist, a visiting medical officer, came in and said to me, it looks like compartment syndrome, you need an MRI. I didn't know that at the time that he'd actually documented that in my medical records. So when he said that, because I'm also a nurse, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, hang on, shouldn't they do something about it? What's happening? When are they going to take me for an MRI? But then I was under about 8 different medical teams, and one of the teams, a surgical team, came in and they said, well, it can't be compartment syndrome because we've never seen it in someone who's had a baby. So it just can't be. And they just kept saying it can't be because we haven't seen it. Meanwhile, I'm in agonizing pain and it's just getting worse. So it was most acute about 10 hours after, in the middle of the night. I couldn't touch my leg, I couldn't move it, I couldn't do anything to it. I couldn't let the doctors touch my leg just to have a leg hurt. Like if I had a knife, I genuinely would have cut my leg off. It was just agony. Like with labor, you get a break between contractions, a moment of peace. But with this, it was just non-stop for hours. And despite that, I had these teams telling me, no, it's not compartment syndrome, it's not. And then I'm thinking, okay, there's no MRI happening, all right. But at this time, I'm still believing that, these people are looking after me. I'm getting the best care. I was one of them. I'm a midwife. I did have some friends message me on Facebook and say, maybe they're not doing the best thing for you. And I was very adamant to defend them in my comments back to my friends, saying, I'm getting the best care. I'm one of them. I'm a midwife. I work in the system. So that was kind of the feeling I had going in that time when I was in hospital, and fully believing they know what they're doing. Maybe it's not compartment syndrome and it's something else. But, the medications weren't working, the IV antibiotics weren't working, and I'm unable to get up and move, and on the strongest antibiotics there was for, what they thought was cellulitis, an infection in the skin. But, yeah, nothing really was done about it until day 10.
Day 10. 10 days of the worst pain imaginable. Sharon was finally sent for testing.
So when I did have the MRI and they finally looked at it, admitted it was acute compartment syndrome, they came in with the full orthopedic team, the specialists, all these registrars, interns, residents, they were all in there. I thought this is very unusual because you don't get a whole team walking in. Like there were so many people in my room, and he came in and the very first thing he said to me was, Sharon, I just want to first tell you that this is the first I heard of you, and the moment I heard, I came rushing in to see you. And I knew that was, to protect them legally, because compartment syndrome is an emergency. So they looked at the scan, they contacted some other eminent surgeons in the country, so leading trauma surgeons and nerve, like hand and foot surgeons who deal with, these tiny little nerves. And after this big meeting, they decided it was probably not in my best interest to have that fasciotomy, the cut into the muscle to relieve the pressure, because by then the pressures had gone down 10 days, and the damage had been done. So the muscle in my leg, the pressure had built up so much that it crushed my nerve, the nerve that runs from my knee all the way to the big toe, which is called the peroneal nerve. It controls your balance, your big toe. So it had crushed it, and that muscle had actually died and was, starting to be necrotic, but they felt that it wasn't safe to open it up because of the risk of infection. So it was just left like that, and I was sent home with more antibiotics. I had the orthopedic team telling me it's compartment syndrome, that's what I'd had, but I still had the other teams thinking it wasn't. So I was discharged home with antibiotics, a foot drop splint, a rollator frame that the elderly use when they can't walk. At the age of 26 with a brand new baby, it was very upsetting, to say the least. So quite a circus, really, what happened there.
And I will get to that, those first few months of motherhood really soon. I just want to talk about the fact that you're a midwife and having that illusion kind of shattered after that 10 days of thinking, I have been let down by my own team. And there was a quote in the book that absolutely broke me that said, having that illusion shattered was almost as painful as losing my independence. Was there a moment where you just realized, oh my goodness, I'm on my own here?
Yeah, there were a few little moments like that. So feeling on my own, the first time was when I was actually complaining of the pain in my leg. It was building up before it had become most acute. And I told the doctor, something's going on, and it was already visibly swollen. And she just said to me, you must have bumped it in labor. You must have bumped it against the rails, and I was denying that. And she said, oh, many women do, and they just don't remember. And, my reality was I hadn't bumped it, but she was so adamant in how she said it, to dismiss what I was saying and my pain, that it made me second guess myself. Did I bump it? And I asked my mum and my midwife, who had been with me during labor, and they both confirmed I hadn't. And when I complained of pain again and saying I didn't bump it, and it was still being dismissed, that's when I first felt I'm on my own here. Hang on, how do I'm powerless here. Nothing I'm saying is working yet. And it was a real shock to my system, because I was starting to realize, maybe not so early on, but somewhere in those 15 days, especially after it became most acute and I couldn't move it and the morphine didn't work, I was starting to realize, wow, if that was me with my work uniform on and my work badge, I could make things happen. That job I had as a professional midwife when I was at work, not in the bed as a patient, I just realized how much power I had over women and their families, and it really hit me. But I don't think I fully was able to articulate those feelings until after I went home and got my medical records. I got a copy of it, and that's when I really started reading, and just this terrible lack of communication between all groups, medical groups involved in my care, and feeling let down by this very system that I trusted and believed in and worked for and protected, just totally let down, betrayed. They hadn't done what they should have done. They had the power to do things, yet my complaints were ignored. They were dismissed. I had midwives come into my room rolling their eyes at me when I pressed the buzzer saying, oh, what do you need now? And I felt this expectation, because I was a midwife, that I need to be able to get up and just get on with it. I felt that that's what, not all of them, mind you, but the ones that looked after me, some of the ones that looked after me postnatally, I had this this huge weight on my shoulder. You need to get up and do it. And because I wasn't doing it, I felt like I was such a nuisance for them, because, you know, I'm a midwife. I should know what to do. I should be able to get on with it. And I'm complaining of pain. And I just wanted to say, I'm not complaining for nothing. I don't want to be here. I had a baby. I want to get out of here. This is work for me. This is not where I want to experience this transition into motherhood. Why do you think I'm making this up? I don't want to be in this bed. You know, you've got these two ends of the spectrum. You're a healthcare provider at one end and a patient or a childbirthing woman at the other. And normally you're either one or the other. But I found myself somewhere in the middle, not knowing which one I was and where, you know, but I wasn't one or the other. I was somewhere stuck in between, and I'd fallen through the cracks, and that was really hard to reconcile, you know. And then seeing that my healthcare providers, when something went wrong, just seriously failed me, was such a I felt like it was such a betrayal, such a letdown, you know. And I don't know if it was right to have felt that maybe I felt I should have got a bit of different treatment, as in not better treatment than the other women, but my assessment of myself, my complaints of pain should have been taken seriously because I was a midwife. You know, that's what I was feeling at the time. My credibility as a registered midwife and registered nurse was kind of dismissed and not, you know, respected. So that's, yeah, they were the feelings I had in those initial stages of kind of investigating what happened to me.
And then there's that added layer of you being a woman on top of that. And there's this like tightrope that women have to tread in lots of areas of life, but especially that healthcare, because you want to be able to advocate for yourself, but you don't want to be seen as the hysterical woman.
Absolutely. I absolutely had that. And maybe now I can articulate it as maybe medical gaslighting or obstetric gaslighting. In another interview podcast I had with Dr. Justin Colson, he actually said this is obstetric medical gaslighting, right? And, you know, if I think about those instances, I remember maybe feeling worried that I was feeling worried that I'd made too much noise in labor. I didn't want to, and I remember asking a midwife, was it like really, I'm really sorry if I was so loud and making lots of noises, you know, like me at this stage, I'm like, really, why did I do that? I have the right to, it's labor. I mean, for goodness sake, you know, why do I need to be quiet for the sake of everyone else? And then in the postnatal ward, you know, this whole, I wanted to speak up. So I think there were two things going on there. This whole fear of rocking the boat as a woman, because, you know, there's society's expectations of you need to behave in a certain way. Don't be that hysterical woman, you know. So I had that. And remember, I was also 26. I was young. But I also had this fear of not wanting to be labeled by the midwives as that midwife, you know, who makes a fuss, because there's this very toxic culture in maternity care in hospitals where we gossip and we whinge about the patients, the women that we look after, especially if they're making a fuss or not getting on with it, or if it's just too hard for us, we whinge when we hand over to the next set of midwives who are going to look after. And it's very toxic, and I will admit myself, I participated in that too when I was working. And it was at that time when I realized, wow, that behavior really impacts the care that women get. And, you know, I had that fear. I didn't want them to whinge about me. So I was also afraid of demanding extra care, demanding things be done, and making life difficult for the staff members, right? But that realization, you know, when we do that, we take away a woman's right to unbiased care. It is because you colour the views of the next staff members' perceptions of that woman, like it's not right. I remember one of the midwives coming to my room, and she was also a friend, and I said, I bet you, like, that particular midwife is whinging about me in handover. I bet you she is. And that friend of mine said, yeah, she is. Because I knew it, and she'd already made an assessment of me as the patient who is whinging and, in a way, dismissing my actual complaints of pain, dismissing the problem going on, because I was an issue for her. I was not the easy postnatal patient, do a few set of obs, get on with it. I made life hard for her because I was complaining and there was nothing was being done. And so because of that, I know also some other medical teams, obstetrician came to my room and was explaining the discussions they had with the anaesthetist and another medical team. And, the way they had been talking about, oh, she's complaining of her leg again. It's this big dismissal of what we as women are saying, and it is medical gaslighting, and there are consequences to that. So, yeah, like I definitely feel there was many instances of that in my care.
Sharon, what were those first few months of motherhood like? Because you got the diagnosis, there was nothing really that could be done besides, I guess, rehab and physio, but then you had to go home and care for a newborn.
Yeah, so my parents took us to our apartment that my then husband and I were living in West Ryde, and they just sat there, and so I couldn't even get up and go to the bathroom, let alone carry a baby. And my husband was working night shifts, and I remember hearing my parents say, oh, how are we going to leave her here? Like, what's going to happen? How, and it just hit us all. Like, I couldn't be there. I needed full-time care, and my child needed full-time care. So we moved into my parents' house initially for a few weeks or months, depending on recovery. That's what we thought. But that ended up being 4 years because, I couldn't stand up. I couldn't carry my son. I couldn't do anything for myself. My right leg was so weak. There was muscle wasting already because I had been on a bed for 15 days. And then with the muscle death, like I just couldn't walk without that frame. My foot had dropped completely. So with the foot drop, and I remember, not being able to, I remember once trying to get up out of bed in the middle of the night and straight away just collapsed down to the floor because my ankle gave in, realized how weak it was, so I couldn't have my baby in the room with me because I wasn't able to get up and attend to him when he cried, and it would take me a long time. So my parents had my son in their room, and they would get up and come to my room, either bring Jeremy to me or help me walk to their room to breastfeed. Whenever he cried, it wasn't me that ran to him. It was one of my family members that had to settle him because I couldn't, and they would get him, and then I was sitting on a mattress during the day. We had a mattress out in the lounge room where I'd sit on, and my walking frame next to me, and the baby on the mattress with me. My family did everything for me, and that if it weren't for them, there is no way I would have been able to get through this. My parents' support, my siblings, all their physical support and prayers, they gave up so much to accommodate us and to help. And, so that the first few months were just so upsetting, so hard. I felt so sorry for myself. I ate so much soft cheese, just felt so sorry for myself and depressed. I just was downing the soft cheese, and because I couldn't move, I also put on all this weight, and it was just not what I had expected or hoped early motherhood to be. I had dreamt of, walking around, in the middle of the night, patting I know many people don't like this, but for me as a midwife, I used to do permanent night shifts, and I used to put women's babies to sleep carrying them in my arms, and I loved it. And I used to think, gosh, I can't wait for the day this is going to be my baby. And when it was my baby, I couldn't do it. I missed out on so much of that because I physically couldn't do that. I couldn't do his baths. My mum, took 6 weeks off work. My dad, they just took me to all the appointments, all the specialist appointments, physio appointments. They did everything for me, and that also was hard for me because I was such an independent woman, and I was doing everything for myself, driving around on my due date, on my own. Like, to lose that independence was just so soul crushing for me, especially at a time where I had just become a mother as well. And then having that taken away and feeling like I'm going back to a child in my parents' home, but not just a child, a sick, unwell child who needed full-time care was just so hard for me to reconcile what was going on. I was, just thinking, God, why has this happened to me? Did you allow this? Why me? And I was crying every day in the shower when no one could hear or see me. Like, every day I was silently I just felt like such a failure of a mother, a failure of a midwife, just like completely shattered. And the only thing that made me smile was that little baby when I had him on my chest.
In the midst of all of this, new motherhood, rehab, trying to figure out what's next for you, you wanted the hospital to acknowledge their neglect, their mistreatment. You started that process. Tell me about Elizabeth. She was the first healthcare professional that you met that wasn't dismissive of your situation. She really helped start that journey.
Elizabeth is just one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met. So she was the patient representative at the time, and she had heard of my story when I called her. She goes, "Oh, you're the compartment senior lady." I said, "Oh, okay." That rang some alarm bells. Like, okay, so they've been talking about me. Right, okay. Something's going on. And I felt instantly she was on my side. Instantly, I knew that she believed me. She believed that my care had gone horribly wrong and something was not right. And she talked to me for hours and she said, right, I want to resolve this for you. So she started me on that journey. So she asked me to write a letter, an official letter, so that she could get the hospital to address it. But before I'd even finished that letter, I got a call from the hospital with this apology. "Oh, well, we've already spoken to insurance." I said, okay, that's something. Okay, what's going on here? This person in this position in the hospital never calls patients. So anyway, I sent the letter and we had a meeting, and I wasn't happy with the response from the hospital, the initial response with the managers who were there. Elizabeth was also there in the room as my support person, but like, even though she was employed by the hospital, her role was to advocate for patients. That was her role, and I could tell that she was my person. She was advocating for me. She was my voice when I didn't have one, and she fought on her side. And so after that meeting, she knew I wouldn't have been happy with that meeting. And so when I called her again, she said, I know it wasn't a great meeting. What are we going to do?
Elizabeth kept trying to advocate for Sharon. Sharon kept trying to get acknowledgement for herself. But it was a long, slow process on both ends. In the meantime, Sharon had to leave her career as a midwife and start all over again.
I don't think I was probably able to grieve that loss because everything was just going on all at once. And I kind of just had to get myself into gear and just straight away start something else. I did 2 masters amongst all of that at night time. It was real circus, in my life. And I had to do something to get qualified because, I didn't want to be at home thinking, well, what do I do now? I had to just do something. So I went straight into public health, and I think for many years I didn't stop and grieve that loss. I think, so over the years, I've had moments where I feel really sad that I don't get to do that anymore. I miss that. I mean, I definitely don't miss the shift work. Aspect of that, but I miss the clinical work of being with women and helping them and supporting them, and the joy of seeing them when they finally get the breastfeeding latch on, and showing new dads how to clean their babies, change their babies' nappies, and doing the first bath with them. It's a real privilege to be a midwife, to be the first person to lay hands on new life. It is the utmost privilege and honor, and not being able to do that is it's quite sad for me. But I've kind of turned it around now, in that after my masters I did some work in public health units, and then went into a PhD in midwifery, in midwives' own experiences of giving birth and how that impacts on their professional practice. So I did some teaching at uni in midwifery, some subjects, and I've still kept my foot in the door with that aspect of it. So, while I can't give one-on-one care to women, I'm hoping that I can at least contribute back to the maternity care world with knowledge about how to care for women who are midwives, with my PhD research, and how to help them when they're transitioning into motherhood, because it's a totally different dimension, with that added knowledge, and then expectations, and because our experience impacts everything we do. And so then the mums, these midwives, they do go back to work after maternity leave, and are we doing anything to support them, especially ones who've had trauma? We don't send our war veterans back to their battlefield. So, but what are we doing to our midwives? If 1 in 3 women, the statistics say 1 in 3 women experience their birth as traumatic. So surely there are midwives in there. What are we doing for those midwives? Are we supporting them when we go back? So I'm just looking into that with my research, and hoping to make some changes there to help them with their experience when they provide care. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at in terms of midwifery. I'm still registered as a midwife and a nurse. I've kept that up. But clinically, I can't be in a hospital.
I'm amazed by Sharon's resilience. 2 master's degrees and a PhD in progress. And amidst all that, she's continued to fight her own battle with the hospital, desperately wanting recognition and acknowledgement of wrongdoing. So the same thing didn't happen again. 4 years after that initial meeting with the hospital, Sharon filed her case with the Healthcare Complaints Commission and had another meeting with the hospital. But this time, it went very different.
I had written an 18-page letter cross-referencing all the elements of care that were not according to protocol and policy, and I've referenced all the policies they should have been following. The hospital said, yeah, you're right, Sharon, you're right. This shouldn't have happened.
How did that feel for you?
It caught me off guard, if I have to be honest, because I was in such a fighting mode for those 4 years. Like, I was angry and just enraged at what had happened, and all the responses I got back from them, were always just defensive. Just, no, we didn't do anything wrong here, and fine, like, you need to acknowledge it and say it, but in that meeting I was full on ready. I had this fire in my belly. If they weren't going to give me what I wanted, if they weren't going to listen to me, then I was going to make them listen to me by taking legal action. because I'd already engaged lawyers by then. Because, you know, all I really wanted was to be listened to and heard. And I think when it comes down to it, that's what any human being wants. That's truly what we really want. And the trauma happens when we're not listened to, when we feel dismissed, and our existence as a human being is just ignored. You know, you like in hospital, you become a bed number, and not a person. Your humanness is taken away. You become this case, you know, this interesting rare case that they talk about. They go back to work the next day with new interesting rare cases. The rare case, the human, has to live with the consequences every day of what happened. And I was just so wanting to fight with them in that meeting, you know. I had all my responses planned for each of those points that I'd written down in my 18-page letter. I had policies ready to show them, but you didn't do this, and this is the policy you should have followed. And when I sat in there, and they actually said sorry, the clinical stream director for obstetrics and gynecology, he looked at me, and I could see in his eyes, and his eyes were welling with tears, what it looked like to me. And he said, we're parents too, Sharon, and we can't imagine how this would have been for you if this had happened to us. You know, he put himself in my shoes. Actually, two of the three who were in that meeting did. And I could see they were really trying to be empathetic, and they had really tried that. And it was that apology where it was just complete, you're right. This shouldn't have happened. It should not have happened like this. You're absolutely right in everything you say. And that was like a massive weight off my shoulder when I heard that. And it took me a while to compose myself again. But I just instantly felt like I could breathe. I felt like this thing that had been like squeezing me and suffocating me just instantly released. And it was this feeling of freedom and like forgiveness was just, I don't know, just pouring into me, you know, because I felt they were genuine. And I realized that's really what I needed. You know, no amount of money would have changed that. Even if I went legally, you know, the money would have helped for my medical bills, but it wouldn't have given me that sense of acknowledgement that I so desperately needed. I just needed to be heard.
But the acknowledgement wasn't the only thing that Elizabeth got from that meeting. They agreed to have Sharon's case written up in a medical journal so doctors all around the world could learn from their mistakes. Sharon herself wrote it. And finally, in July 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, it was published.
How did it feel to be able to see it in tangible form in a journal? Describe that experience.
Oh my goodness, Georgia. I was crying. Like I was just crying. And, you know, 2020, we're looking at 9 years since the birth of my son in 2020. And when it was finally there, it just felt like there was justice. I felt like there was justice. I felt like I'd been heard, and I felt validated. I felt like my story was validated. And this is what happened to me. This is me. This is my case report. And I fought so hard because all I wanted was for this case report to be written up. And the reason was I had myself found 15 cases of this in the published literature of women having acute compartment syndrome in one of their limbs after giving birth. So I found it. And for me, and all those case reports were ones where the doctors had identified it, done the fasciotomy, and, you know, negative outcome mitigated. There was one I found in the case law, in law case files, where a woman had sued because they didn't do the fasciotomy. I thought, that's interesting. Now, that wasn't in the medical literature. I thought, how many other women are there around the world where this is happening? The doctors don't know what to do, and all you see is, you know, ones where fasciotomy is being done. I thought we need to educate that this may not be as rare as everyone thinks. It may not be. So for me, getting that report was such a victory. You know, like, yeah, I did it. Thank you, God. This is out there. It took so long, you know, like finally getting this story professionally heard in the medical literature. And I thought that was done, and I felt really I'd achieved something. So for the next woman out there, there's something there for the doctors to look at, and what the risk factors are, and if she's got this pain that's not going away with morphine, consider this. And right, and so I'm getting on with my life, doing my PhD, got remarried, life is moving on. I wrote my book, and then 3 weeks ago, I kid you not, Georgia, 3 weeks ago, this guy got in contact with me on Facebook Messenger. Hey, Sharon, I saw you on the acute compartment syndrome group, where there's a couple of hundred of us in this group in Facebook who have had it. He says, my wife just had a baby 3 weeks ago, and she had acute compartment syndrome, and I came across this. And anyway, long story short, this lady got a fasciotomy from the other side of the world in the United States. She got the surgery she needed because the doctor saw my case report. For me, it was it was so emotional. I just felt, what am I here on this world to do? What's my purpose? And I just, my dad, being a pastor, always say, there's always a plan. God always has a plan. There's always a reason why things happen to you. Maybe you might never know why it happens. And it's really hard to reconcile when bad things happen to people. Really terrible things. And I guess I just felt so fortunate and blessed. I felt like it was a gift from God to allow me to see all this fight that I had, with the hospital, this unrelenting fight that I didn't give up on it. And I just felt like it was God allowing me to see the good that came from it, that this other woman didn't lose a leg because her doctor saw my case report, and they did the surgery and they saved her leg from needing amputation. And it just gave me so much more inspiration to keep going and keep speaking and keep fighting and keep encouraging women to speak up when they have been dismissed, when something has gone wrong in maternity care, because you just never know when your fight's going to save someone else. So, that was such a blessing from God to be able to connect with this woman and her husband and see her baby and just kind of not, we haven't physically met, but we've had video calls, and just to be able to be there for her and help her through this journey has just made it all worthwhile for me. Because I think in the last, I've written in my book, if this just helps one woman, all of my tears would have been worth it. And just to get that gift back, to see that it has helped, just to see that it has helped somebody, it's just been everything to me. It's just been absolutely everything. A reward from God, I feel it's been.
Thank you to Sharon Stoliar for sharing her journey so vulnerably and courageously. I and many women are indebted to her openness and drive to make the birth process smoother. Sharon has written a memoir about her experiences called Scars of Gold, and you can find more information about that in the show notes. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends. Stories are always better when they're shared, and you never know what you can learn from someone else's journey. If you or someone you know has a story of hope to share and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, I would love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the Finding Hope page at hopepodcasts.com.au. For now, I'll leave you with this verse. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 to 13. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.